I asked myself what it is to be a success. I came to Australia in 1997 from Somalia as a refugee, and the kind of people I think of as a success are not the kind of people you see on television. My name is Aji Abdikarin, and I grew up in Kismayu on the south coast of Somalia. I had already finished high school when the civil war started in 1991. From then on, the schools were taken over and used as shelter for people running from the fighting in Mogadishu. With my brother and sister, I went to Kenya, and that was the last time I saw my father. I waited in a refugee camp for years without work, hoping the war would end, or they would give me a visa to go to somewhere like Australia.
My name is Anna Dimo, and I am from South Sudan. I was only 19 when the civil war started. By 1987, there was too much killing and destruction. Then we moved to the capital, Khartoum, where I was principal of a primary school. Then the government forced all the Catholic schools to close, and I left for Egypt with my 4 children. In Alexandria, we lived with 4 other families, and I was a leader of women's groups. I also organized homework and Bible studies. The day they told me I was accepted as a refugee to Australia, I cried and cried.
Life can take so many unexpected turns that I have always been ready to grab opportunities when they come. Yet back in a refugee camp, my thoughts were far from Mitsubishi and careers. It was really about a day-to-day survival. My name is Girma Feisadari. I left my native country Ethiopia in 1986. Everyone I knew had been affected by famine and fighting, and many of young men like me being called up were dying. My father, who was only a farmer, had been imprisoned and tortured for 2 years by Mengistu regime, so I knew I could not stay. Working only at night, it took me 26 days to walk from Gondar in Ethiopia to the Sudanese border. After 6 months in a refugee camp, I moved to Khartoum and looked for work, any work. I also hoped to study, but education was expensive. One day I got a job with Across, a Christian aid agency, looking after a house they had rented for their volunteers. One of the people was an Australian, David Stone, a nuclear chemist who had been studying at Cambridge University, and we became friends.
He had no papers, no qualifications, and no opportunity to work except when a Western person gave him a menial task. Gemma was always there for us. We sort of look back on that and say, well, he was just our houseboy, but for him it was an opportunity. He didn't betray the trust that was given to him. At the end of that time, he said to me, David, would you remember me? And I knew what he meant.
My name is Deng Thiek Adut. I was about 4 when I left my town in South Sudan because of the fighting there. With my nephew, I walked for 33 days to Penyindu refugee camp in Ethiopia. The camp was full of hundreds of little kids like me who had been separated from their parents. We were forced to join the rebel Sudanese army, and soon I was carrying an AK-47. I was fighting with the army back in South Sudan in 1992, and I was injured by shrapnel and a bomb, and then injured again in 1993 and 94. I was 10 at the time. After thinking my brother had died, he appeared out of nowhere and helped me get away. We made it across the border to Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. There we met an Australian who was working for the UN, and she helped me apply for a refugee visa to come to Australia. I was 15 when I arrived in Sydney in 1998. I had never learned to read or write, and I only knew a few words of English. My first night in Australia was spent in Katoomba, where my sponsors lived. I'd never experienced cold like that, and 3 days later, I left and came down to Sydney and lived with my brother's family.
It's not money or ambition that motivates me, it's the sense of belonging and well-being. My name is Idil Abdullahi, and I was born in the northeast of Somalia. My earliest memories are of living a comfortable life with my family. I grew up in Mogadishu, which in my mind was a city of rich colors, music, and culture. My father and his family had been persecuted by General Barre's dictatorship, so when the war started in 1991, my mom took my sisters and me south away from the fighting. In the refugee camp in Kenya, my mother got a job with the Red Cross doing secretarial work, and through them we applied for refugee status with Australia in '93 under the Women at Risk program. It was early August when we arrived in Sydney. It was freezing. We had come from lush green Nairobi and we felt we were being placed in a boxy flat in Auburn. One thing I remember is they had stocked the flat with food, and I was so excited at seeing a whole fruit bowl filled with apples.
I arrived here in 1997, and after 6 weeks of emergency housing, my friend and I found a flat in North Parramatta. The flat was completely empty. No bed, lounge, fridge, nothing.
I remember arriving in Sydney with my 8 kids. Here, everything was different. I had no language, no understanding of the culture, no knowledge of how to get help for refugees like us.
In 1990, I flew to Adelaide and was greeted at the airport by David and his wife Hazel, and we went home with them where I would live for next year. David and Hazel's support was crucial. This family represents the best in what I value and admire in Australian society.
This is my first job in Australia. When I started here in 1997, manager asked me, "Do you have any experience in Australia?" And I said to him, "No, but give me a go. I'll try the job, and if I can't do the job, you don't have to pay me." So he said, "Okay, we'll give you a go." Good to see you, mate. I stayed at RIM for 8.5 years. Studied at TAFE and worked my way up to first-class welder.
The only work I could do with my bad English was as a cleaner. Then I got a job in aged care and did my certificate 3 in nursing. After this, I worked as a teacher aide in primary school. Then I started to work at San Bakita Center. I am still there now. My role is a pastoral care worker for Sudanese Catholic community in Sydney. In San Bakita here we have English classes for women on Monday for the men, and we have the people have to do the TAFE for the women, and we have 100 volunteers, Australian born, help us here to run the center.
At the beginning, I had a happy 6-month period studying English with other refugees and migrants. Then I started high school, and it seemed the way of learning was very different from Somalia. None of the kids really seemed interested in what the teachers had to say. Although I'd always loved learning, I couldn't get anything from school or fit in. So I left in year 11 to work in a factory packing tapes. Not long after, at 18, I got married and had a baby. But I always missed studying, and my daughter's curiosity inspired me. A couple of years later, I enrolled in uni and I started a degree in social work, but I switched to fine arts and graduated in 2012.
Normal high school wasn't for me. There the kids laughed at me because they couldn't understand what I was saying. So I went to TAFE to study English. Then with the help of dedicated teachers, I finished my HSC and got into law at the University of Western Sydney. Since then, I have worked for various law firms as a criminal lawyer, as well as doing pro bono work for the Sudanese and African community. If I really had my wish, I would like to be in Africa helping kids and maybe doing environmental law.
My name is Rosemary Kariuki, and originally I'm from Kenya. This shop is called African Village Market. This is more than a shop because many women come here to ask questions. It's like a home away from home. We have given a lot back to this country. We have a lot of our people from Horn of Africa working in the disability, and now we have so many women working home care, and they are looking after their African children.
Once I had settled into my job at REAM, not long after I married and I had my first child, I started a uni degree in business studies. I started in 2001 as a part-time student while working at the factory, and finally I graduated in 2006. It was a big moment. To have my family at the graduation was very important, so I could show my kids that if they try their best, they could achieve their goals. Then, I started with the Smith family as a warehouse technician. But when the company moved to another city, I decided not to go straight into another job. My wife Zara loves her work in the aged care home. She has won awards for this, and so I didn't want her to change. For the moment, I do casual shift in warehousing, but the rest of the time, I help with the school pickups and drop-offs and work with the Somali community as a volunteer.
I enrolled in the University of South Australia in accounting. I had already been away from my country and family for 5 years, and now I had opportunity to make something of myself. My sponsor David and his wife moved to Sydney, and eventually I moved too. I graduated in 1996 and became a CPA in 2000. I had a couple of jobs before starting in accounts at MLA Mitsubishi, and 16 years later, I'm still there, and I am now the finance manager, a company secretary, and an alternate director.
I think a lot of people in the Somali community questioned my choosing to study art. What can you do with it? How can you make money? But it was art that I felt saved me and motivated me. I started in photography because my uncle was interested in it back in Somalia. Then the henna art, and after that I began to work a lot with ceramics, and now I have a studio space at the Arts Center at Kasula Powerhouse, where I've also exhibited my work. A lot of it is a response to my experiences coming here with my family from Somalia, that idea or fear of being erased. It's what I like about painting with henna. You paint it on, you wait for it to dry, then you brush it off, and you're left with an imprint of the design, a memory on the skin. Apart from exhibiting and selling my art pieces, I also do regular work with community organizations as an arts officer. I organize art workshops for kids and adults, and I do a lot of henna workshops in the community. And at the moment, I'm curating a new and wonderful exhibition of African art with the local Auburn Council.
Basically tonight we've got a group of about 30 young Somalis through the Somali Youth Outreach and HARDA program. Sport is an important ingredient in terms of bringing youngsters together, especially those who are isolated, a bit marginalised. HARDA basically organises different activities. One in particular is what's happening behind me in terms of the soccer. There's a ball coming, about to bounce on our head. The youth programs, the cooking pot, which was a real hit in our communities. Many of them have come through and experienced a lot of torture and trauma throughout their life, and it's just one way of forgetting about those things in their lives.
When I first came here, I never been in a private car. I was only 15 and I fell in love with them. Eventually, when I got my driver's license and could afford to buy one, I used to race at the Eastern Creek public races.
I like my car. It is part of my salary package and it is comfortable and smooth, but there are many more important things in life than driving a new car. My wife, 2 children and I live in a new house in East Northwest, and we live comfortable but not extravagantly. After the experience I have had, I refuse to live the kind of life where shopping become a hobby.
For me, life in a rich country like Australia is not about accumulation of stuff. My wife and I live modestly. We own our home. It's not a mansion. We have 2 second-hand cars, and we eat mostly what we cook at home. What is more important to us is the value of education and living an honest and peaceful life.
Sudanese people like to look good and dress well. It is part of our culture. You will never see a Sudanese man or woman going out in public in just pumps or a t-shirt. I like to have a good car, but all my hard work is about more than this. It's about knowing my family and my community are not at risk from any more wars. Our struggle is to be educated and to have the same right as the people here. For 5 years, I have been raising money to build 2 schools in South Sudan, but I am trying to raise another $200,000 to finish it. My dream is to give young women the kind of opportunities I had before the war.
In 2004, I was planning my first trip back to Somalia since leaving in 1991. I had bought the plane tickets and was about to leave when I heard my father, who I had not seen for 13 years, had died. This was a difficult moment for me. It was very emotional. While I feel I have achieved a lot in this country, I also feel my greatest achievement is my family, and I'm proud to tell people my best job has been as a dad. I look at what my wife had achieved and the awards my eldest daughter has already achieved for her hard work at school, and I know I have found something much richer than diamonds and dollars.
In 2011, I returned to South Sudan, which had just been declared independent, and I was reunited with my mother. Being only 29 and not married, I am lucky at least to have a few relatives living here in Australia. But I also count my friends and community as well as being part of my family.
In 2002, I finally had news that my parents had been located in Kenya, in Kakuma refugees camp. They had been a part of the departure by the thousands of South Sudanese to Kenya. I applied to sponsor them to come to Australia, where they now live with me. So far, I sponsor many families to come here, more than 70 people, and often they live with us. And they are now all my family.
Yes, I work long hours and I enjoy my job, but it's all about helping to make a life for my wife and the 2 children. My wife, Asrasi, is also Ethiopian, and she understands what I have gone through. When I left Ethiopia, my mother was very sick, and it wasn't easy to leave. Now at least I have been able to go back and visit, and I was fortunate to see her before her death in 1999. We are still very connected to our culture, and we always celebrate events like Ethiopia New Year and Christmas. I'm active in my church, and I go every Sunday to Ethiopian Orthodox Church in King's Park. There was a group of us who helped set it up, and together my community raised money to bring out a priest whose salary we also pay. The service is full of beautiful music, and it is giving me time to reflect on my life and my connection with my old country. I am also involved in fundraising for other Ethiopian causes. I try to go back to visit everybody in Ethiopia every 2 years, and I often wonder what would be like to live there now. Years ago, I made a promise that before I die, I have to create at least 4 jobs there, and probably this would be in a manufacturing business.
Many people wanted to go home to South Sudan as soon as they could, and many have returned to help mend the country. No one had chose to leave Sudan. They were made to. But now we are here, and Australia seems like our country as well. With us here, this country and Sudan are joined forever. We have carried a lot of our culture here, and we will always carry Sudan in our hearts.
I feel the pull of Somalia intensely. I remember being there and not here, and my dreams and nightmares were always of Mogadishu. Not that that is home, it's just that it feels like an unfinished business. And when I'm somewhere with lots of Somalis, I feel a huge sense of kinship. Even when I was young and mixing with all sorts of people, Australian youth culture never really grabbed me, and then not long after I had my baby, I rediscovered my faith and believe in Islam again. And here I am, still living here, still part of the life here in Australia.
As much as we can, we try to preserve our culture and our languages. But many of those I work with in my community are often people who have struggled with living here. Often it's young people, refugees, not just from Sudan, but Somalia and other African communities who are torn between different worlds. They get in trouble with their parents and elders, with the police. And so now in areas like Blacktown, there are programs to bridge these gaps, which I am proudly part of. I don't know if I would stay here forever. For me, my dream is to return to South Sudan and do what I can with the education I have got in Australia to improve life over there, especially for the kind of a child I once was like.
This is my life in Australia. I have started a family here, and I don't think I would go back. For a visit, yes, but not to live. I'm interested in Somalia. I'm even planning a short film that is about the differences between there and here, a new and old world colliding. Overall, I feel we are very fortunate to live in this country, which is full of opportunities, prosperity, peace and equality.